guys go on a Cabo trip, guys go to Vegas, guys go to this. And I always say no, 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 no. And primarily I say no because I like start evaluating my time. And my top priority is my family and then obviously business. But at some point you like almost overcorrect.
Every day away is like, it's got to be worth it, dude.
I have a lot of work to do. And so I switched my flight mainly because I just want to get home to the family.
I'll take the flight that'll get me home at 1 a.m. and I'll have to drive the hour from Austin Airport. But if that means that like I'm waking up here and like I'm starting the day with the kids, 1,000,000%, I'm taking that 10 out of 10.
But sometimes I found myself that like, I won't do anything unless it's like prioritizing the family, prioritizing the business or locally, and finding that balance is important. But it's hard to do that because you do feel like, well, man, I'm out here. Yeah, this is cool, but man, I could be home with the kids. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Gabe Yanez and I, we are on for our weekly episode. We talk all things life. Gabe, where should we start? Should we talk about the pig hunt, or should we talk about the gift for Ava, or where'd you want to start, man? I'm fired up. I'm ready to go this morning.
I like that you came on and said, I know exactly how I want to start. And then you start recording and you're like, how should we start?
Dude, so we were on a call earlier. My wife, she called me. She's like, hey, or, this is actually a really helpful tip for relationships. Whenever Ashley calls me, I always want to answer. But if I'm on other line, I try, you're like, oh, shoot, is it something urgent? So instead, she has texts. Hey, call me when you can. It's nothing urgent, or call me. It's very urgent, or whatever. And so she wanted to know about gifts for the kids for Christmas, and I felt like I actually added value this morning. I gave good insight, and we're gonna get Ava some underwater, to be able to play music underwater because she likes to swim. So some underwater headphones. I thought that's a pretty cool gift. It kind of like aligns with like doing shit outside while also kind of being like digital. It's nice, good hybrid.
Yeah, gift giving is like one of those very specific love languages that like just means a lot to a lot of people. In some families, it's like a big deal. And I don't know if it's like the way that just I was raised, and me and Errol on the same page, but at least for now. And again, I always say these things with like a very clear understanding that like you can say this now and things change because kids get older and then they start asking you for stuff, and like, this can definitely change. But right now, especially with them being small, like I feel like anything that you can get just ends up being clutter. So we're sticking to the no gift rule, which grandparents are obviously going to ignore. So we at least said, we appreciate like books, and try not to get more of like stuffed animals, and like everyone gets you like stuffed animals or like little cars, and you just like, how many do they actually need? So anyway, Dude. We're trying to stay away from gifts for now. But yeah, man.
Yeah. And we don't do like the tons of gifts for the kids. We just try and think of something like meaningful. Like Kaden just got a new baseball.
Like what you just said. Like,
yeah, that's an example.
She swims a lot. I know she always brings up she really loves doing that. This is a cool thing that she's actually going to use, right? Like I think that's, to me, what should be at the crux of like something you're going to get someone is like not something for the sake of getting something, but like what are they actually going to use? So I think that's a good idea, man.
Yeah, we were running between that or that new, that pen for like an iPad where you could like write, like a style pen or whatever you call it, like a.
I've seen something, but
what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
But dude, so I was just today's Monday morning. I had a hell of a travel day yesterday, man. Hell of a travel day, and I coming from the great state of Texas was very difficult with where I was at. I was like right on the border of Mexico. And I went out for like a really quick trip just for this hunting trip, like really quick. And dude, we attempted pig hunting, deer hunting, and that was about it. And we were unsuccessful. So that's what my weekend consisted of.
So you were talking about it a little bit. Was the plan always to literally like catch the pig and with a knife? Like you guys weren't rifle hunting, weren't bow hunting? Did you have that stuff with you, or is it just like, this is how we're doing it?
Yeah. So dude, actually in preparation for this, I really had like my mind made up that I was going out there to bring back meat for the family, and in particular pig. So I set up my AR. So I didn't know this at the time. So this is all new to me, but I was looking for a bigger round than a 223 or 5.56. And I'm pretty proficient with my AR because of the tactical games, right? So I'm pretty proficient. So I have my rifle with my upper, and there's a lower. And so what I did is I swapped out my upper for a 300 blackout round, which is this similar to a 223, but it just has like more powder, more steel, more stopping power. And so I changed out my upper based on recommendations from some friends that I had, but it's still like an AR platform. So it gave me like the exact same feel, the exact same scope, the exact same everything, but I changed out the round that I used. And so that's what I went for and I brought. And I was using a brand new Night Force optic. So for those people out there who are like, kind of nerding out on this stuff, dude, I have a badass Night Force 4x16. So it starts off with 4 magnification, goes up to 16 with an offset red dot. So this is what all the guys are using at the tactical games. So if you're looking straight down the barrel, you could go from 4 to 16. But if you have something really close, you rotate the gun a little bit and it has a red dot as if that was like your normal optic. And so you could go anywhere from 50 yards to 1,000 yards with that same rifle. So that's what I was using.
And you didn't get the pig?
No, I didn't get the fucking dude. Okay, I'm not gonna get too caught up here. I'm not trying to get emotional. So I arrive and the first night we were so basically I was there for a day. And so I get up at like 5:30 in the morning, 6 in the morning, which was still dark out, and I get in a blind. And a buddy and I, we were bunking in the same room or whatever. So we get up early and I'm sitting there. And dude, we saw tons of deer at this feeder. So the feeder goes off at 7 a.m. I'm like, oh, bro, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, whatever you call it. Feeder goes off, tons of deer come in, but no boar, no pigs. And so we were disappointed, and I wasn't allowed to shoot a deer at that point. So fast forward, the day goes on a little bit, and then I got approvals from the ranch because they only have so many tags to go shoot a doe. But it has to be a very specific doe. So I'm like, all right. So I go out with one of the spotters, one of the guys who works the ranch, to take me because he wanted to give me like the green light, like, yes, that's a good one, or no, that's not. Because I don't have enough education on, like, I wouldn't be able to tell like a full size versus like whatever. So we get out there, we're sitting in this blind. One of the buddies I was with happened to take a weed gummy. So there's 3 of us in this blind. I was the only one that was allowed to shoot. And one of my buddies is there just fucking tripping out on this weed gummy. Anyways, I didn't eat anything or drink anything, so I'm out there shooting. But anyways, so I'm out there. We didn't get the right doe. So I see a bunch of deers go by me, not the right size, not the right gender, whatever. And so I go back in, and then that night we took dogs out to go hunt boar. And so these dogs, there's like 2 different types. I had never done this before. There's like these almost not beagles, but like they look like bloodhounds. Like they're like out there to go track these animals, and they pick up on the scent. And then once they pick up on the scent, they start barking a certain way. And then they let go of like Tyson, we called him. Dude, this guy. So Tyson is in the back of the truck. He's in a cage. He has a Kevlar vest on, and he's a Rottweiler mix. This dog looked as intimidating as possible. Once the dogs get this boar to a specific part, they let go of Tyson. Tyson goes, sprints at like 30 miles an hour and goes and either attacks the face or the balls of the pig until the people can get there, hold it down, and then you stab it. But it never happened. And I wasn't going to be the guy who stabbed it, but I wanted to see the experience. I'd never had it before, but we never caught anything. We didn't get anything. Whew. It was intense, bro. It was an intense night.
What an experience, man. So in Texas, for people that don't know, and I can see people hearing this and it's like, what the hell? Like, What are you guys doing to these poor pigs? But wild boar in Texas is a huge issue. Like it's a land management issue. It's like a safety issue. Like they are destructive animals that, they cost communities a lot of money. They cost farmers a lot of money. And the reason is that they breed like crazy. They have huge litters and they're very prolific. Like, they'll have a litter of like 10 piglets and then they'll be pregnant right away again. So it's a huge problem and there's a huge overpopulation. So there's a lot of these ranches and stuff. Like there's all sorts of hunting. I had asked you where you were going hunting because we just had the Christmas party at our gym, and a couple of the guys there were talking about their hunting experiences and stuff. And there's a bunch of them that had actually done the off a chopper hunting boar. And like literally like with a shotgun, like 10, 20, in like one quick flight. And the reason that ranches allow you to come and do this is because it's actually like, it's dual purpose. Like you get to hunt, but then also, it's just, you're actually culling that the number of boars that are, being super destructive. So that's, I think, an important thing to note, because the reason that there's a lot of this going on, I had heard of the dog and the stabbing approach, but yeah, that's the reason that it's a big deal in Texas, because you just have to get rid of these boars, man.
And full disclosure for anyone who's wondering, my intention from this particular hunt was 100%. I brought a cooler with me. I had my gun ready. I wanted to go and as ethically, as morally as I could, harvest either a deer or a pig the way I wanted to. This was for me. Learn how to process it, learn how to do everything, and then bring the meat back for my family. That was my intention. And because I did not achieve my goal. So next time.
Have you gone hunting before? I feel like you have.
Just duck and pheasant.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And that, like, again, the appeal for me isn't there because I don't want to just like kill something like just to kill it. Like, like, I want to really be able to like, I want to be able to sit there later on. Actually, it's funny enough. They had a deer and a pig like in the refrigerator that they said, hey, you can take some of this home. I was like, nah, dude, that's not like my goal. Like I can go to the store and go buy this. Right. I want to be able to really know the process. I could go home and explain to my family, like, hey, this is how it went down. This is how I ethically did this. This is, or whatever, like as you can. And that was my intention. And I came up short, but had a good learning experience in the process. I wouldn't do I would not probably go out and do like the dog thing again. I wouldn't. It was an interesting experience. It was worth like kind of learning how they do it, but I probably wouldn't do that again.
Yeah, it seems like a lot, man. It seems like a lot, but man, what an experience. Our first year in Texas, I thought it was just kind of par for the course, but at least my experience now being here for over 3 years, I think I did get really lucky that first year, because we have a deer feeder kind of just down the little hill from my house. And the first year, because the way that the tags work, at least in my county, is does are only legal for the 4 days Thanksgiving weekend. That's it. So you can only on public land. On like just on my property, right? So it's different when you're going to like a private ranch and they handle their own kind of like tags and whatever. But for my county, the way it works is you can go to like the local HEB, you get your hunting license, and there's a certain amount of tags that you get. But in terms of does, you can only hunt does on those 4 days around Thanksgiving. So I was like, really, I just want it for meat. I think it'd be a really cool experience for the same reasons you said, like being able to like feed my family, and the fact that like, honestly, like, dude, the fact that being a Texas resident, it's like $15 to get a hunting license. You can fill an entire cooler with some of the healthiest meat that you can. I was like, why wouldn't I do that? Right. So that first year, set up a deer feeder. I remember Ariel was super pregnant with Shay, and she was like, I'm going to go get my nails done. And I was like, great. I'm going to see if like a deer shows up to the deer feeder. And I was like standing on our porch, just watching. And I had no expectations because we have the dogs that chase the deer all the time. But it just so happened, this one deer came and was like eating the corn. And I was like, am I about to shoot this deer? And with my rifle, yeah, I mean, we got the deer, and I pulled up YouTube, Steve Ranella's channel, and like field dressed it and butchered it all myself off of YouTube with like not the right knives. It was kind of a nightmare. I have this awesome picture of Ariel, like 8 months pregnant, because Shay was born in December, and this is the weekend of Thanksgiving, helping me process this deer. It's a pretty classic picture. She's got the biggest belly, and she's like breaking down these deer quarters. But dude, there was something, and again, this is probably all in your head, but there was something about when we made it ground and like the steaks that we had and the backstrap that just like, I don't know, tasted special. It was cool, right? Like you saw this process from beginning to end, and it ended up, on your plate, feeding your family. And some of it even was some of the first food that Shay had once he was finally eating solids, were like, deer steak from stuff that we hunted on our property. And at the time too, it was cool because we raised our own pigs for the ranch, for the farm. So some of what we did was we made like pan sausage and sausage, mixing the deer
Both
and
of
the
them.
pig,
Yeah.
which is really common because the deer is so lean. Pig tends to be on the fattier side. So a lot of people mix those two meats because it mixes really well. So we had that for a while, but I've been unlucky ever since that, like beginner's luck. I've tried the same thing the past 2 years. Again, just the weekend of Thanksgiving, I like stand out there with the rifle and like nothing shows up. So it's one of those things, man. One of those things. But it's very cool, and I can't wait to do it with Shay. I can't wait
Oh,
to
dude.
like be able
And it's
to
got to be
like.
done right. You know, like I think I went out there to kind of experience it because I want to take Caden. I took Caden duck hunting once. It just wasn't right. I want to take him and like really experience this the right way. Like really learning how to track, learning how to like, I want to just do it right. And, you know, I think for anybody listening to what I'm talking about right now, it's like, you go and you put yourself out there and you try new experiences. And maybe I'm just telling myself this because I went a long way and I came up empty handed, but I learned a lot in the process, meaning I traveled a long way. I went and did something I had never done before, whether it was me trying to like hunt on my own or also with these dogs. And now at least I could say, hey, I have an opinion. I wouldn't do that again. You know what I mean? But like, I think it's important. Like you could pass judgment on certain things, but like go out there, explore it, and then just see if it's for you. And if it's not for you, dude, it's what's the learning lesson is 10 years from now, someone's like, hey, do you want to go do this? You're like, you know, I've tried that. It's not my thing. You know what I mean? Like, but at least you went out there and you experienced it without any preconceived notions. A lot of things happen that you don't know about. So that's my takeaway from this weekend.
For sure. And that's a good perception to have. But I do think, and I know that this, you know, is something that plays into your mind because it plays into my mind now too.
Oh, time away.
It's so brutal to like spend that time away from the family and just like not even get the goal that you were trying to get, man. Like now it's just different. Like, dude, it's so it almost feels like a weekend lost. And I know it isn't. And I think the perception that you have about it is great. And that's what you should. But the tough part is like now it's just like, dude, every day away is like, it's got to be worth it, dude.
Well, that's why. So I changed my flight. I was originally coming back on Monday, and I have a lot of work. I have a lot of work to do, and so I switched my flight mainly because I just want to get home to the family. And so, basically, to your point, and this is something that I've had to struggle with. This is a good conversation, a good topic to bring up. I have a bunch of stuff I want to talk about today, but as I'm on this flight, right? So it took me like I don't even know how long to get there. There was no direct flight, and then I had to drive 2.5 hours with a friend of mine, which was cool. Like we got to spend time together, we got to connect, we got to talk. And I was around 30 other guys. There's a lot of guys. We were having a lot of conversations. And I say no to a lot of this stuff a lot where, you know, guys go on a Cabo trip, guys go to Vegas, guys go to this. And I always say no, 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 no. And primarily I say no because like one, it's like a lot of drinking, a lot of stuff like that. And I'm just like not as into that. Two is I like every single thing I like start evaluating my time. And my top priority is my family and then obviously business. But at some point you like almost overcorrect where like maybe back in college you were down to go do whatever and time wasn't as valuable to you. Then you start, you know, building a business, having kids, and like every single moment, like you knew this before you had kids. Remember, I would always tell you like, yeah, bro, I'm flying out, boom, that night. But sometimes I found myself that like, I won't do anything unless it's like prioritizing the family, prioritizing the business or locally. And I wanted to kind of like expand myself out a little bit this time, but it's hard to do that. And finding that balance is important because you do feel like, well, fuck, man, I'm out here. Yeah, this is cool, but man, I could be home with the kids. So it's like that fine balance. You know what I'm saying? You got to also do that. Otherwise, you can't have those type of conversations you're looking for with other guys.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, man, for sure. And it's also one of those things that I never understood until I was in it, for sure. You can understand it to an extent. Like, I get it. Jason wants to get back to his family. Like, I get it, I guess. But then you're like, you're in it and you have a family and you have kids and you're like, oh, I get it. You know, like I'll take the flight that'll get me home at 1 a.m. and I'll have to drive the hour from Austin Airport. But if that means that like I'm waking up here and like I'm starting the day with the kids, 1,000,000%. I'm taking that 10 out of 10 versus like I could stay the extra night, have an easy flight in the morning, wake up, get a workout in, you know, like super chill, roll in at like 4 p.m. Like no big deal. Back in the day, I would have chosen that 10 out of 10. But now it's like, how do I get home as soon as possible? And it's funny. It's one of many things that like you just can't understand until you're in it.
Yeah. And I think finding, like I said, finding that balance, I think is important. I'd say that I'm like all in on what you just said, and having like a little bit of like that. Hey, make sure you also prioritize, like prioritizing relationships locally and doing that type of things. I think is really important. When you're talking about doing trips, it's a whole nother like gamut, right? Because I also travel a lot, dude. I looked up my Southwest. I 26 flights
A lot.
in 2024 just on Southwest. 26. That's a lot. That's I mean, so it's I travel a lot, and so maybe for me, that's the reason why I overcorrected is that I travel a lot for work, and I find ways to justify that, assuming it makes sense. Like shit, I'm going to Virginia. I'm gonna be gone in a little bit. So maybe I overcorrect on that side, but anyways, came up empty on the pig. Came up empty on the dough. But not my last attempt. I will attempt again, and it will be even more meaningful the next time around.
I'm curious what the guys you were with, because like I said, I was talking to a couple of the guys at Aftermath here at the holiday party, and they were mentioning that like at least wild boar, you have to like make some sausage out of it or something.
Yeah.
But it is like it's super gamey, very tough. Like not the best eating kind of on its own. But on the flip side, I mean, I took you to that restaurant Daidu here in Austin, where a bunch of their dishes are wild boar. We had some wild boar dishes, and it was like some of the most delicious things you had. Granted, that's like a chef that like specializes in that stuff, and a lot of it is kind of like how you cook it. Oh man, I haven't been there in a while. We got to go back. That place.
Yeah, based on what I understand is like with boar, it's really specific. Like you want like a not like a baby, but you want like a younger one, and not like this giant testosterone filled male
boar. Yeah,
and then you get the backstrap and stuff like that. So that's what they're saying. That's they're mentioning like, I mean they're kind of a especially when they're getting hunted, right? Like, dude, like they smell like shit. I mean, it's whatever. But yeah, I think what they're saying is to find like a juvenile, or like not a juvenile, but like a smaller, like 100, like 200 pound, and that's where the good meat is. But again, I wouldn't have known any of this unless I'd educated myself. Like, I think that's the most important thing, is that now I could have a more constructive conversation because I've experienced it. Or even like the 300 blackout round, I had never even heard of that round before I was speaking to friends about trying this, and they were educating me on it. So those are the type of things I think getting outside your comfort zone helps you pursue.
Yeah.
Dude, I had I wrote this down, but I do want to talk about the book that I'm reading.
That you're listening to.
So, okay, that's a bunch of bullshit. And Liz, like, look, I appreciate Liz's perspective.
I couldn't wait. To drop that one.
Dude, I think, I don't know how we could like create a poll. Maybe I'll do this like on Instagram or something. If you read a book, so, okay, if I'm on an airplane and I'm listening to a book, or this morning I'm on a stair machine. Okay, here we go. Reading. Oh my God. So Liz, who helps us produce the podcast,
I love it,
literally just put on our screen the dictionary of reading. And the dictionary is the action or skill of reading written or printed material. So is listening to a book on Audible reading a book? So if you said to someone, hey, I read that book, or you're not allowed to say that, you have to say, hey, I listened to that book. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I think I think more than anything, it is the fact that like, it's not reading the book, it's listening to the book. Like period. I think that that's pretty black and white. Okay. And again, like, no judgment here. I think that actually it's incredible that we live in a time now where you can consume the information that are in so many incredible books while going on a run, while being in the sauna, while doing these things. And if you have that ability, why wouldn't you? Especially if you're someone that's busy and doing a bunch of stuff. You can be doing all these things and scrolling on your phone, or you could be listening to a book. But I don't think that changes the fact that it's not reading.
All right, fine. So I am listening to the book of The Gift of Fear.
And I'm just giving you a hard time.
The Gift of Fear. And it's been, what's really interesting about this book, and I still want to gather my thoughts on it. And one of the things we're doing better on the podcast, and this is one of the things that I really want to focus on, is like coming with, more information about certain things or whatever. And So I'm reading this book by Gavin Becker, and it was referred to us by Tony Blauer. And the reason why I think it's important is that I found myself, you and I actually both spoke about this on our last podcast about the Deaf Reset, that reading and or listening to audiobooks has not been a huge priority for mine in 2024. And I want it to be a bigger priority for me in 2025. At minimum, one book a month, like at minimum. And the thing is, I have time for it. I'm bullshitting myself if I say I don't. I exercise regularly, and oftentimes I either listen to like music or I'll listen to a podcast. Instead, I could just listen to an audiobook. And I think that's a really an important note to make, is that that's what I'm going to be focused on in 2025.
Yeah, we had talked about this, and I want to get back to reading because I think, especially for what I do, I think it's very valuable, and I've gotten away from it. There's a very clear correlation, to me at least, with the more that I'm actually reading, the more that I feel like my writing is a little bit sharper, my communication is a little bit sharper. Like there's just something about flexing that muscle that I think is incredibly important, that I honestly have. I told you I haven't read in months because I always used to read, always, every single night. For a while now, for over a year, I've gotten the phone out of the bedroom. One of the best habit changes I could have made, because I used to scroll until I fell asleep. And that is one of the worst things that you can do for many reasons. So now the phone charges out in the living room. I have one of those like little light alarms that wakes up with like a light that gets brighter and brighter. So I'm not waking anyone up. It usually wakes me up before they wake up. So great. That works great. And I was reading instead of doing that. So that was perfect. But now that Charlie is a little bit older, but she sleeps in the bed with us, me having the night light when they're trying to put her to sleep, just, it doesn't work. So that's been kind of like my excuse, because kind of what it is, to stay out in the living room, either watching TV or on my phone until I'm actually ready to go to sleep. And then I'll leave my phone and come into bed. So it's just about finding the time to get back into reading. But I think that that's really important, because for me, like I listen to podcasts every morning when I'm out on my run. And I don't think that I necessarily want to switch that for audiobooks, just because I've done audiobooks in the past and I just enjoy podcasts so much more. And to me, they're both ways to like dive into information that I'm really passionate about. So I'm going to choose the one that I find slightly more entertaining. But I do want to get back to like reading. And that's something that I'm definitely committing to as part of the Deaf Reset. And then hopefully that springboards me into building that habit and continuing it for the year.
Yeah. I mean, I think with podcasts, when I listen to them, I'm getting like little nuggets, little sound bites. I'm sure people get that from this podcast for sure. With the book, I think it's just a little different for me, is like, I don't know. It's just a different platform, right? You're gathering information on a particular subject or story for like a longer period of time. I think both have value. But one of the things I found really interesting about this book is that this guy opens it up. And he's like, look, I wrote this book a long time ago. I could add in different layers about how COVID changed things or how internet changes things, but none of that changes things. Like managing this fear is so important. And it doesn't matter if it's post-COVID, pre-COVID, pre-social media. So he wrote this book before any of this stuff was like super popular. But then the foreword basically says, I don't think anything changes. Like, this is my opinion on it. But one of the other things he does is like right from the get-go, he's like, dude, I'm not trying to be politically correct in this story. I'm trying to be factually correct. And factually, statistically correct, I should be referring to men as doing most of these things because they are capable, or they in general produce more violence, like 99-1 compared to female. So I will continue to refer to them as I should, talking about men. And like, it was just interesting, the fact that he even had to make that like kind of like caveat statement that I'm just going to say it like it is. I don't care about being politically correct because this is factually correct. But I thought that was an interesting way to open the book, that he even had to make that statement. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you would hope that people always approach things just trying to be factually correct and not really interested in how that's perceived or received. But yeah, it's not the time we live in, for sure, dude. Although things do seem to be changing in the right direction, for sure. I think we reached the peak of having to walk on eggshells maybe like a year ago.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. So for any, dad out there, this book protecting the gift of fear. Basically, what the premise is that the gift of fear, survival signals, is that we numb these survival signals because we don't want to be rude, we don't want to be impolite, and whatnot. And so as I'm listening to this, the way I am approaching it, and I'll continue to talk about it as I finish the book, is I'm approaching it in the way that I want to be able to share insight to my wife, but more importantly, or just as important, or even more important, my daughter. What type of things should I be saying to her based on this book that he's done study after study after study for years on what type of indicators can she be aware of as she gets older? You know, she's 13, she's going into high school. So that's the way that's like the lens that I'm reading this book through, not so much for myself, which has been really helpful for me. I wanted to go ahead, Gabe. Yeah.
No, yeah, man. I mean, situational awareness is probably one of the most important things when we talk about, protecting. And I've talked about this many times because, I know that I'm not as trained as someone that, would train in combatives and stuff. But either way, I think that the ability to sniff out a bad situation and then get out of a bad situation is the most important thing. And it is something that I try and be on top of. And I have gotten better at, can still get so much better at, with the example of like just making sure that like I'm not running with headphones in certain scenarios, to make sure that, I'm not staring at my phone in certain scenarios, to make sure that, I'm looking out for certain things that stand out. Like that was one of the biggest things in both the book Left of Bang, which I brought up when we had Tony on the podcast. Really good book that I had read a while back, and I was revisiting some of the ideas from that. But essentially this book Left of Bang talks about everything. Left of Bang meaning like things that happened before the bad situation, right? Like right of bang are all the things after. That's dealing with like the actual situation. And it's a military term because bang would be the explosion,
like a gunshot or
the gunpipe breaking out, whatever. Left of that is everything that led up to that, right? And all the potential warning signs that were there that something was going to go wrong, and kind of being aware of those and being, proactive. So maybe some of the similar things that are in that book. But yeah, just being aware of that in a time where we're bombarded by distractions, I think is important. Because I mean, we can all probably relate to this. Like
For
our
sure.
phones, our watch have notifications. Like there's just so many things pulling our attention constantly when we're driving, when we're walking, when we're in, really crowded places, that make it a lot harder to probably see red flags that would be a lot more obvious 20, 30 years ago. So I think having that understanding and that perception, especially now that I have a family and I am responsible for their safety at all times when they're with me, is just an important mindset to have. And then diving into the books like you're reading then gives you like the more tactical information. Like, okay, I have the mindset of I need to keep my head on a swivel and I should be aware. But now what am I aware for? What am I looking for?
What are the parameters? I mean, I'll give you a really good example. And I wrote down some notes. I pulled them up on my phone.
Share them.
And so as a kid, what did your parents tell you? Never talk to strangers, right? It's like that's like a very common thing. Like, don't talk to strangers. And I think what's important as a parent is like you give in these like rules, these guardrails. You're like, dude, don't talk to strangers. So that's the threshold, is like you don't talk to strangers. That's what you're saying is like that's the threshold. So I wrote this down. Don't talk to strangers is a threshold. Yet that's the most important thing if they are lost. So think about it. If a child is lost, the most important thing is to speak to a stranger. Like, so you have to understand that dichotomy, right? That on the one hand, you've been told your whole life, don't talk to strangers. But yet, if you are lost, the most important thing that kid can do is go speak to someone and let them know that they're in trouble, right? And so that was interesting. But if that's the threshold, it stops there. It should be never let someone take you anywhere. So here's an example. The issue isn't strangers. The issue is strangeness, is what this guy said. And I thought that was really interesting, where when you say don't talk to strangers, it implies that strangers inherently are dangerous, but that friends are not dangerous, right? And what he's saying is like 99% of the time, that's actually inaccurate. 90% of the time. Most of the time where the danger comes from is actually people that have groomed you, that you've built trust with in some way, shape, or form. And so what he's saying is that we should be teaching our children not just to not talk to strangers, but to look for strangeness. And in particular, the threshold should be to never let someone take you anywhere. That should be like the threshold, not like, so basically there's a ton that he was alluding to. But he said, hey, if your child is lost, you need to teach them to walk up to a woman. This was really interesting. He's like, out of all things a kid can do, you look for a police officer. That's gonna be hard to do. Look for a store manager, whatever. He's like, out of anything that you could teach your kid to do, it's number one, never let anybody take you anywhere. And number two, if you are lost, go up to a female first. And the reason why he brought that up is that statistically,
For sure.
women, if they're nurturers, if a child comes up and says, hey, I'm in trouble, they're going to do everything in their power. Like this is built in their DNA to make sure that child is safe. Whereas a man, sure, there's going to be exceptions to this rule, of course. But in general, be like, oh yeah, you can go find your mom. You can go talk to the clerk over there. They can go ahead and make an announcement at to the supermarket or whatever it is. So that was something I took away as like, okay, that's an interesting takeaway. Like my kids, again, they're a little bit older, but if they ever did get lost, to identify a woman is based on statistics. This isn't like a political thing, right? This is just statistics. And then the other one was to create the threshold that you never go anywhere with anybody unless it's been approved by your parents or whatever that is. So those are like two little, I have more takeaways. I'm just wanting to share that with you.
I'm going to add the book to my list, man. That seems like really interesting. And like I said, like useful stuff. Like you can have the mindset all you want that like, hey, you need to be aware that bad shit can happen. But having, like, I hadn't thought of those things that we started doing, that Ariel's mostly been the one that, has brought these to my attention. I know she follows like a lot of accounts and reads a lot of books that talk about this stuff. Is one, and I'd never thought about this, is like Shay's getting to the age where he's like, like learning words and learning everything. Teaching him the actual anatomical term for his private parts is very, very important. And it makes sense if you think about it. Because if you like think about it, like what do you start doing? You kind of call it silly names or whatever. Just kind of figuring stuff out. But that's a really easy way for people that have bad intentions to mask the fact that they're doing things that they shouldn't. We've been teaching him from day one that that's your penis. Like your penis is your penis. That's what you call it. And that's it, and like you wouldn't think about this stuff, but it makes perfect sense, right? Like if you're calling it, any funny, silly name, then there's a little bit of gray area there of what that is. So that's been number one. Number two has been teaching him our names, because for a long time, it's just like Dad and Mama. Yeah. But now he knows, and we've been teaching him, and he knows Dad Gabe, Mama Ari. And I think that that's so important to teach as early as possible, because to your point, like if all he's known is that that's Dad and that's Mom, he's lost at some point, he goes up to a woman or whatever, like who's he even looking for? Like Mom or Dad? Like it's very important for him to know our names. And you wouldn't think about that if you're not being intentional. And then the third thing that Ariel's brought up that again makes perfect sense is a lot of people buy or get gifts of like, say like a book bag or a sweater with a kid's name on it. That's a big no-no.
Yeah, because
right?
they
Like,
use the name.
Exactly. Like it's cute and whatever for them to have like a little Shay jersey or a little Shay hat. But like, is that really the best idea for him to now be walking around and have his name like printed on him? Probably not. And again, some of these things, some people might listen to, and if they're doing it, like it's no judgment.
Right.
And again, like they might not be a big deal, but if you think about it, it's just kind of like, if they're an unnecessary risk, and they're very easily avoidable, because they are. All it took is like, like telling our parents, who are the ones that would buy something like that for them, like, hey, just nothing with their names on it, no big deal, and it's simple things, but that I think that if you're getting in front of, you're just statistically like lowering the possibility of anything bad happening down the road. And that is my primary job as, the protector of this family. So I'm going to definitely check out that book, because there's so many.
I want to finish it, but like, think about the one thing that we were just talking about, like with kids your age. So my kids are older, right? But like, dude, imagine with Shay. Hey, Shay, if you ever get lost from us, go find a woman and let them know. But like, I think that's so different than just saying, hey, go find, especially like where you're at, like go find someone that works here. Go find someone that works there. Go find a police officer. It's like, well, dude, that could be, the guy in the book brought up like, oh, your children know to go to the police department. It's like, what? What if the police department's like, I mean, how old are they? Like, what? But the example that he brought, like, go find a woman. I just, it's such a shitty thing you have to say. Like, remember when you and I talked about, hey, what would a woman rather do? Find a bear in the woods or a man in the woods?
Right.
Like, it's the same example though. Like, it is just this guy. I mean, he was a guy sharing the story. He's like, dude, I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm just telling you like it is. Statistically speaking, you should go up to a woman. And it's like, oh, all right, fair enough. You know, that's the world and it's fine.
Yeah, I was talking to Ariel about this the other day. Like this straddles into that area of like being politically correct, but I'll share this with you because you're sharing it. Like I told Ariel, man, like I take shaded gymnastics every week and there's a bunch of other classes going out in gymnastics and all the gymnastics teachers are like youngish girls who are clearly gymnasts themselves. But then one week I went and one of the instructors, not on Shay's side, was a guy. And it was like a not like a super young, like it wasn't like a kid either. And it made me uncomfortable. Like I'd be lying if I said it didn't. And I'm sure that this, like the school that we go to is great. I'm sure that there's, I would hope so. There's like a vetting process and he's there for a reason. And it's not like, you know, anything malicious. But it just, I don't know, like a red flag does go up. And I don't know how I would feel. Again, I was removed from it because we take Shay, he's a boy, and he's in a different class, and we love his coach, and she's a girl and all that. But I don't know how I would feel if he was the one teaching, you know, my, you know, 8-year-old girl who's, you know, in her tight little gymnastics. And I don't know. I don't know if that's an unfortunate way for me to think. But to what you've said,
that's like the intuition you have to,
right?
But that's the intuition you just have to listen to. Like the opposite of that would be like a woman who goes into a parking garage and feels an intuition, like, dude, this isn't right, and like doesn't listen to it. It's not saying like in this whole book, and again, I'm just getting into like multiple chapters in, but it's like he's not saying like you feeling the way you feel is the way you feel, and it's been ingrained in you because of, you know, generations of understanding that, hey, something here is not like the rest. And it's okay to question that, right? You're not assuming this person, you're not saying this is a bad person.
No,
you're not saying he has
any
ill intention.
And that's what immediately makes you almost feel guilty, right? And bad.
That guilt.
I was almost
he talks about in the book.
I was like embarrassed to talk to Ariel about it.
Right.
I was like, am I crazy? But I didn't like it. I did not like it.
Well, so I wrote this down. It's like cost of appearing rude. So like basically this guy goes into a conversation, be like, a woman who gets presented and a guy like says something, and there's all these like there's these ways of like I wrote this down, like loan sharking, typecasting. Like he goes into like all of these pre-incident indicators, and he says like a woman who comes off like rude, like so a guy says to her something, whatever. If she comes off like rude and totally whatever, the likelihood that person, if they're a good person, they're just gonna be like, damn, that girl's fucking whatever. But if they're a bad person, they're going to instantly be like, all right, she's not my victim. And so anyways, he just goes into this thing of like, you have to listen to that. And like, and it's so here's a point I thought I'd make to you. And this is really interesting. Why does a child feel off with someone? This is something I really am taking from this, is that you go to a party. For example, this just happened yesterday. Ava was working at Nordstrom's, as one of our friends owns this bakery and they do pop-ups at Nordstrom's. She was working. She worked for like 4 hours, got paid money. It's great. It's awesome. She says to me when she goes home, there was a weird, creepy guy that came up to us. And I'm like, huh. And so normally I'd be like, oh, dude, yeah, don't pay attention to them. Like, that's weird, whatever. But based on this book and just based on like where I'm at kind of in my journey, the next question should be explore why your child feels like that person was weird. So like if they go up to someone, you have a family friend, like, dude, I don't like Mr. Bobby. And he's like, oh, Mr. Bobby, he's just kind of like, that's just him. He's like, whatever. But you should explore deeper. Like, why don't you like him? What comes off that way? And the reason why that conversation is so important is that then you could start explaining you could start looking into, instead of stranger, it's the strangeness. And these children can start learning what is appropriate and inappropriate and start picking up on these factors. So those are just like little things. And I know that, some of the stuff I'm saying can almost come off like paranoid. You have to take some of this with a grain of salt, but I do think it's important to at least have these conversations with your spouse or with your kids, or thinking it through the lens.
Dude, I'd rather be paranoid than ever see my kids get hurt,
Yeah,
And I'm sure that obviously there's a line there, right? Like obviously there's a line there, but I don't think that any of the things that you're pointing out, and obviously I don't think any of the things that we've started to do are paranoid. I just think that like if they're that simple and honestly like that easy to do, why wouldn't you do them? And I
yep,
think the other point that I would bring up to what you said and like asking the follow-up question and turning that into a conversation is then you're also not dismissing it, because I can see that after a while, if constantly when they bring up like, hey, like this guy was a little off or whatever, you're just like, oh, no big deal, like whatever. There's going to be a point where Ava just doesn't share that with you. Like, why
exactly.
should you? Every time you just say, oh, no big deal, then in her head, she'll just be like, well, no big deal. And that could be the one time that it should have been something that would have been brought to your attention, that would have been a red flag that you could, hopefully, obviously, I'm talking hypotheticals, but I think that that's the other benefit of always entertaining it and having the conversation for all the things that you said, but also then it's always an open line of conversation. They never feel like, oh, this isn't a big deal, so I'm not going to tell dad about it.
Yeah, the don't be afraid of strangers, be afraid of strangeness is definitely something like that's a cool takeaway. That's like a soundbite, right? And you could take that in so many different directions, but I think that that's important to teach the kids. One thing that, I mean, again, just using this book as an example, he talks about these pre-incident instigators. I wrote this one down too, the forced teaming. So this was the first one that he spoke about, is that he says, and he brought up a real life example where this young boy was unfortunately kidnapped in a store. And basically this guy comes up and the young boy is obviously like doesn't want to be shopping, like doesn't want to be shopping with his mom. And so this guy comes up, he's like, hey, my son is actually like a little bit of ways at the toy store. And dude, he didn't want to go shopping either. Like, I totally get what you're saying. And because he overheard the boy talking to mom. And what that's called is forced teaming. So the guy is trying to make you feel like you share something in common, right? Like, hey, my son didn't want this. Your son doesn't want this. Or you're stuck in an elevator together. Your projection of a shared bond that's actually being forced on you. You see what I'm saying? Like, he's forcing this shared bond. And so long story short, he's grooming this mom. He keeps saying all these things. I'm going to take your boy over to, oh, I have a son over there too. Da, 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 da. He ended up kidnapping this kid. But that forced teaming is something for people to be aware of. Like, somehow this person who's a total asshole finds a way to make you feel like you're on a team together. And all of a sudden your trust level starts to increase. And that's where problems start to occur. That was an example.
Yeah, man. All that.
There's a whole bunch of, yeah.
God.
And like, here's another, okay, this is my last takeaway on this, and then I'll let it, because I could share a lot more, but look out for too many details was one of the other things he was saying. Like, in this particular case, it was like, oh, I could take your son over there. Oh, your son likes this toy, so does my son. Oh, your son's name is Brad. Oh, my son's name is Brad too. Like, the person is trying so hard to like add more detail because he feels like he needs to try and develop more credibility. And then you're sitting there like, wait, why does this guy have so many details? Like, he knows the owner of the book of the store. Like, what? So those are like all the little things. And there's power predators and there's persuasive predators. And I think both of those are aware of for you and your family to how you communicate that with your kids, I think is important, but those are the two types: power and persuasive.
Man, and just all this, I think all this boils down to the looking the part stuff too, man. I mean, I just can't stress that enough, and I don't know if he talks about this.
Oh yeah, of course.
I'm sure he does, but like,
yeah,
all of those things, like the first step is that person is in there looking at everyone else that's in there, trying to see which would be the easiest person to do this to. Yep. And there's something about how you look and how you carry yourself that will immediately disqualify you for being the victim, period. And I think and yes, a big part of that, and this is what we talk about like looking fit and being fit and all of those things. But I do think that another part of it is, and something that I'm honestly trying to work with, is if they see me like scrolling through my phone, hardly paying attention to my kid, I think that makes me an easier target because I'm disconnected. I'm not as involved in the situation. So that makes me an easier target. So I think that there's two sides of it. There's, hey, that guy looks like trouble, so going to avoid him. But then it's like, that guy also looks like super like distracted, like he's hardly paying attention.
Well, yeah.
So that makes it easy too. And I think that both of those are important. And I think I have one covered. I don't think I have the other one covered as well as I'd like to. So it's something I'm
let me leave you with this thought. If your child is further away from you in a store environment than your wallet or your purse. So if you wouldn't, this is a really good analogy. If you wouldn't leave your purse 10, 20, 30 feet away from you in a store, right? Unoccupied, why would you leave your kid? So that was an analogy he made. And he said you would let your kid go off because you're assuming they have these skills that they would present, that they would let you know if something was off. But these other people are really good at trying to make them feel like they don't have that. So if you wouldn't leave your wallet or your purse somewhere and you would keep an eye on that, it's the same idea. And to add one more note to this whole thing, and I'm sure this could be a topic we're going to bring up a few more times. If you are fit, if you are capable as a man, as a woman, and you could show up, the most important thing, this is what he wrote. And so you have the power predator, you have the persuasive predator. But if you're looking for someone who has a sexual attraction, like this is like the fucking worst of the worst. These guys should be burned, right? Vulnerability itself is the stimulator. So that's what it is. And so there's, maybe a certain type you're going for or whatever, but the attraction, right, is actually the vulnerability. And so if you could find a way to be less vulnerable, you become less attractive. And the way you become less vulnerable is by showing up, being present, all those things. And that was a big takeaway that a bunch of stuff, but it's a good conversation just to start getting your brain thinking like, man, what can I do to play the part, to be a more present, and being less vulnerable is key.
I love it, man. Some of this stuff, I can see it being easy. Like you don't want to touch it. You don't want to talk about it because it can send you, especially now as a parent, like it could send you down a deep, like, rabbit hole of thinking of worst case scenarios that would literally drive you nuts. And that's not the point. The point is just to understand that, like, unfortunately, this stuff happens and there are many things in your control, whether it's, the training you do and the foods that you decide to eat, to all the stuff that's in the book that you're talking about, that you can do to significantly reduce the probability that it ever happens to you. And that, I think, is one of the most important roles that we have as protectors. It's not, yes, is it important to, find a combative and learn those skills? Sure. Could it be beneficial to hit the range and get really good with a handgun? Sure. But that stuff's like the flashy stuff. And I would argue that in many ways, it's like the cherry on top. Like if you ever have to bust out a handgun and a lot of other things have gone wrong well before that.
Oh,
so I think
sure.
that it's like when we talk about nutrition being at the pyramid, at the base of the pyramid, and nutrition is also at the base of this pyramid, but there are a lot of other things that aren't as flashy that I think are so much more important to have this foundation of just situational awareness, knowing what to look for, and just preparing your family entirely as a unit, right? Like you also can't be the only one that has all this information. That's useless. To your point, this is giving you stuff to talk to Ashley about, to talk to Ava about. And I think that that's also the necessary next step is they need to have the information. They need to know what the plan is. They need to know how to react to these scenarios because, oh man, this is tough to say, especially with them being so young, but you're not always going to be there.
No. And the biggest thing, again, this is something we've been on a kick on as of recently on this podcast, is just the solution is not to brush underneath the rug. The solution is to listen to the intuition and to then evaluate what the next best step is. Because from all the research this guy was doing and all the research that I've looked up online, most people, most of the time, and Tony Blauer backed this up, have an intuition that something is wrong, but they didn't listen to it. And I think that's the more you educate yourself, the more you can then educate your family and start having constructive conversations. That's it. You know what I mean? And not to just bury it and dismiss it. So that's kind of the current kick I'm on. And I hate to even call it a kick. It's just I want to know more. I want to understand statistics. I want to look at probabilities. And then you start kind of narrowing down what statistically could you have done differently to put yourself in the best position so it doesn't happen to you.
Can we get the author of this on the podcast? Can we reach out?
That's a good idea, actually.
What's his name? Gift of Fear book. Gavin DeBecker? No, I think he's like pretty famous.
Is he?
Yeah. I mean, doesn't mean we can't get him on the podcast, but
is he too famous for us, Gabe?
The name sounds like super familiar, but we should try. It'd be interesting. I mean, dude, everything that you were talking about sounds super interesting and super important. It'd be cool to have him on, but
dude, let's do it. All right, Gabe, I got to head to the sheriff's department. We are hopefully going to be getting some police officers very, very fit. That's our intention. Our intention, 2025, 2024, 2025, dude, we are on a mission to make men fitter. And we're going to do that in a variety of ways, but make sure that you are on our newsletter. Every single week, we're putting out awesome information. Make sure you're checking out the previous episodes of the podcast. We have great guests that have been on this show. And make sure you're following us on social media, dude. We're putting out a lot of stuff, just to, like those little spurts of inspiration. These are a little bit longer form. We talk a little bit, dive deeper, but continue to engage with us and continue to hit us up and let us know how we can support you, because that's really meaningful, especially when I get responses to the newsletter. It means a lot that we're actually like doing what we say we want to do. Like, we are trying to make men fitter. That's the goal. Share with us how we're impacting you.
Heck yeah.
That's all I got. Well, hey, I hope your families are doing great. I hope you have a great rest of your 2024, 2025. Have a kick-ass new year and keep getting after it.